For decades in the past, when I was a much greener lad, I assisted a pal of mine moving up to Cardiff from our native town of Bristol. He'd landed a spot as a talent scout for Swansea City, which was truly his ultimate dream. And so while me and all the lads were gutted to lose his company, we were all immensely chuffed for him too. Now we set off early in the morning, and then once every box was inside, we grabbed some bar food and a few cider shandies for me. And then I began the long trek back to Bristol. I'd waited far too late to start back, so it was nearly 1 a.m. by the time I started to get signs for the Welsh borders. The lanes were empty with only the random truck roaring past me, and I remember there being some sports talk on the stereo, but I wasn't really focused. I was in my rusted Ford Cortina, a 79 model that I picked up cheap about 3 years back. It usually treated me well, and it had been driving great all day. But just after passing a village called Chepst, the engine coolant light popped on. I stared at my dials, watching the gauge spiking into the heat, and cursed under my breath. As I backed off the pedal, since it usually bought me a few seconds, I turned the vents up full blast to try and wick some heat off the block. But that night, it seems my luck finally gave out, because just a moment or so later, there was this sharp pop from under the hood before smoke started billowing out the gaps. Moments later, I heard this awful rhythmic clanging noise echoing from under the hood, and so I rolled over to the soft shoulder and then came to a rest. Just in time for the pistons to lock up entirely. And after that, beyond the clicking of my hazard bulbs and the sound of sizzling metal cooling down, there was nothing but stillness. For a few moments until I snapped, I remember yelling, "Is this freaking happening?" a couple of times, and then after taking a few slow breaths, I stepped out of the car and tried to fix it, and I labored for 40 minutes, and in that time, a grand total of 3 vans passed me. But even with me signaling at them as they went, neither of them halted. I didn't just stand there like some idiot for the whole 40 minutes. Mind you, I lifted my hood not long after stepping out. But when I did, a cloud of smoke and the stench of scorched oil came rushing up into my nose, and after fanning away some of the haze, I noticed a tear in the main radiator pipe, and then noticed how loads of fluid was spraying onto the asphalt and making a large blue puddle. I didn't have a spare pipe, and neither did I have enough water to fill it up right, and even if I had, the block had overheated so badly that I didn't trust it not to freeze up again. Basically, I wasn't moving anywhere in my old Ford, and since there were no cell phones back then, at least none for the likes of me, I had no choice but to hike if I wanted to find myself some help now. I guess the nearest roadside phone would have been about a mile up the lane, maybe further, and so I shut my car, left my lights blinking, and then started trekking along the dark dirt path with a lamp in my hand. Now, I thought I'd be on the trek for quite a while, but then no sooner had I started hiking, I came to a gravel drive previously hidden by a thick briar, which led to what looked like a tall 4-story manor house. Now, I was so relieved that I was basically pumping my fist, because despite the fact that there were no lamps glowing on the bottom floor, there was what looked to be lantern light in both the side-facing upper rooms. I felt bad for knocking so late, but since the option of trekking along the highway was a much more risky one, I decided that I didn't have much choice. It was a particularly black night, new moon and heavy fog, so it was only once I got nearer to the walls that I saw how dilapidated it was. The bottom floor panes were either smashed or cardboard over, and there were holes in the brick too, along with a lot of cracked lime. And as you can imagine, I started to get really foul vibes from the place, but I try not to judge homes by their facade too much, because you tend to find kindness more times than you're stung for it. And so, with that in mind, and looking back very recklessly, I decided to bang on the door. I didn't bang too hard or violently. I didn't want to alarm anyone. But when my first bang got no reply, I banged a little bit harder again. There was total stillness, no movements behind the wood, no murmurs inside, nothing. But then after taking a step back and glancing up at the high windows, I saw someone watching me from behind a dusty-looking sheet, and I can't lie, it did spook me a bit, seeing a pair of eyes peering back at me through the low light. But as soon as I flinched, the eyes vanished, and I began to hear noises inside the house. Now, it sounded like a good group of people, maybe 8 or 9, and they were muttering like they were plotting among themselves. I heard a little voice in my head saying, "They're up, bang again." But before I could even process it, I heard the sound of someone chuckling inside the house. Not loudly, though more like a dry sort of rattle, as they tried to keep their breath low. The bad vibes that I was feeling spiked up to 11, so instead of risking a clash with whoever was either hiding or more likely nesting there, I decided to get out. I turned around and jogged back up the gravel drive as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder every so often to make sure that no one was chasing me. Now, I was quite sure whoever was inside was tracking me from those panes, but as long as they didn't follow me, then I didn't care what they did. I'd almost gotten to the end of the drive, to where those two stone pillars held no gate, when I started smelling something foul on the wind, something that smelled like melting. And then when I turned the bend and could see out onto the lane again, I felt this almost reflexive shout burst out of my throat as I realized what the smell was. It was my car was on fire. Now, I suppose I moved on pure panic and rushing over to it, because there was absolutely sweet Fanny Adams I could do about stopping that blaze. All I could do was just stand there cursing and spitting and looking around for whoever might have lit it, but as you can probably guess, there was no one, and the whole place looked vacant. And I knew for a fact that it wasn't when I realized just how much of a grim situation I truly was in. I started sprinting along the lane until I got back on the highway. Now, it was only a two-lane bypass, so I could walk along the edge without being in too much peril, but no matter how much peril passing vans posed to me, it still felt safer than staying near my blazing car in that ghost house. Now, I think probably about a half an hour must have gone with only the rare car going past me. And in that time, I didn't try to get anyone's help just in case it was the people from the home. I mean, the joke was on them in a sense, because that poor Cortina was definitely on her last legs, but on the off chance they wanted to do more than just torch my car, I had to be very wary about who I showed myself to. Now, I was really bloody shaky for that first half an hour, but after that I started to settle down a bit. I hadn't seen any lights or anything idling outside the house. And if they really did want to hunt me down for whatever reason, I think that I'd have met them already. So once I settled down a bit, and after maybe 4 or 5 more cars passed me, with me ducking in the hedges on the edge, I made my way to the lip of the road and then held my hand out to what looked like a Jeep Cherokee of some kind coming my way. Now, it slowed down as the driver noticed me, but then instead of turning on the light above the dash, someone in the rear seat started pointing a beam in my face after cracking their window. And right away, I knew that wasn't normal behavior when I realized whoever was in the car didn't want to be identified, and I turned and started jogging away. Now, a second later, I heard a very normal, "Need a ride, mate?" Now, one that was just civil enough to break my stride and make me think that I might have been being paranoid. But then the second I stopped, I turned back to face the car, and the rear door swung open, and I heard someone yell, "Grab him." And I remember dashing right at the woods at the side of the path, not along the road where the car would have been able to hem me in, but at, and then through the thorns and brush. I remember shutting my eyes as I felt branches tearing against my skin, and then when I opened them, I found that I came to a wall on the other side. I leaped over it with speed and force that I didn't even know I had in me. I mean, I was hardly some gym rat back then, but I wasn't exactly in top shape either. But I swear I think I cleared that wall like a pro athlete for fear of what might have happened if those thugs had caught up with me. It's strange looking back on it as well, because these days all I do sometimes is sit and think why those people chose to come after me like they did. But in a moment as I was sprinting, it didn't matter a bit to me. All I knew was that those people were out to hurt me, and all that mattered in the world was getting away from them in that moment. Now, I ran across this big empty field for what felt like hours, running and running until I couldn't anymore. And then when I got to the other side and saw a road ahead of me, I swear I saw that same Jeep driving along the lane with someone shining a beam out into the grass. I had to pivot my path and head off at a slant to avoid the Jeep. And along with anyone to my back who might have chased me, I had to force myself to move when I didn't think that I could move anymore. And even though I was quite a tough young man, and one full of pure panic, I soon felt like that I was about to vomit a lung and drop over. In the end, I found myself hobbling onto a street, and then right back onto another dark field because I was too scared to be out in the open with a car full of lunatics trying to find me. I kept on going like that until I came across a small parish, and then as I was walking its dark and empty lanes looking for anyone who might be able to help, a patrol car appeared, and an officer asked what I was doing walking the lanes alone like that. When I told him what had happened to me, he told me to hop in the car, and then off we went to the local station for a cup of hot joe and a few cookies. While I went into more detail about what had happened as soon as I mentioned the house that I'd stopped by and mentioned how there had been people inside. I remember these two cops giving each other a look because they told me that the people inside must have been vagrants. I thought that there might have been partly because of how broken the house was, but the police confirmed that it was empty and that there shouldn't have been anyone in there. They said that they'd roll over and check it out, but they doubted anyone would be there. Vagrants are kind of like vermin, they're pests, and sometimes they're aggressive, but they're not thick. And they just move on somewhere else, and then maybe return when things all die down, but in all likelihood, they were gone from that house for good. I remember asking the two constables why had they torched my car before tried to track me down like that. And the first words out of the constables' mouths were, "Well, what did you witness?" He was convinced that I'd seen them doing something that they shouldn't have been doing. And after spotting my car, which they assumed was still running, they tried to make sure that I couldn't get away before hunting me down. But that was the thing, I hadn't seen anything, and once I'd established that all we could think of was that those vagrants just want to scare me off. One of the constables said that since they didn't know who I was, they might have assumed that I was some kind of scout or law enforcement agent. And at first they might have been scared that I was a constable, but then when they realized that I wasn't, they must have thought that I was fair game for a beating. And if only to make sure that I was too scared to return, and with nothing else to say, I gave the police the phone number for my room in Bristol. And then since I literally lost everything, but my wallet, one of them was kind enough to give me a ride to a nearby rail station. It was long past sunup by then, so the rails were active, and I didn't have to wait long before I was on my way back to Bristol. They called a few days later saying that that house was empty and there wasn't much in the way of clues tying anyone to the crime. They promised to keep their eyes on the ground and would let me know immediately if there was any lead, but till then they told me to be patient because things like that took time. Sadly, that was the last I heard from the police, marking the end of my first encounter with vagrants, and hopefully my last too. I had no idea that those people could be so hostile. I mean, call me simple, but the vagrants I was familiar with were the nomads who took over empty flats in Cardiff in the 70s. I thought that they'd be more into folk music and peace signs than chasing down strangers, but I suppose times had changed then, and people change with them.